Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Local Cinema, a very special episode indeed. Um, you know, we don't really do politics over here. But today we have somebody who not only does music but also is, at least is an activist of sorts. Um, introducing, uh, hold on, I need to find the right OBS scene to switch to. Introducing Seb Choe. Seb, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, what's up, Teresa? Thanks so much for having me. Awesome to be back on local cinema online.
Yeah, no, because you played the John Julius release show way back in the day.
Yeah, shout out Jan Julius.
Yeah,
That was the meat shot idyllic release party, I think.
yeah, no, it was a great time. The format has evolved a little bit since then, only slightly, because we're still here in the same basement. We've moved things around a little bit, but yeah, I guess since all that time, since that show, kind of what have you been up to? Like, how is your life different since that time in, I think it was 2021, I want to say.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. In many ways, it's more the same than different. That was the kind of beginning of this nomadic period, which I'm still kind of in. So I was in New Mexico for a month at that time
Hmm.
and have been hopping a lot still, mostly between Hawaii Islands and the state of New York. But how are things different? I don't know. Maybe things are starting to stabilize a bit more in terms of like where I am geographically.
Hmm.
But otherwise, still doing the same mix of stuff. Yeah. Architecture, housing justice, youth education, music,
Hmm.
the fun stuff.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, I mean, so I guess, like, when did, like, this housing justice thing start for you, and what kind of led you to what kind of led to the formation of this, like, of, yeah, the 9 profiles of real estate activists, and, like, what was kind of the impetus behind it?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Um, I guess the housing justice work kind of began maybe more formally in 2019 when I began organizing in Charleston, South Carolina. But
Okay.
I went to undergrad for architecture and at the time was at Columbia University when this Manhattanville project was expanding into Harlem. And I think I had some kind of general understanding of displacement having lived in Seattle and seeing my punk communities get displaced by Amazon in
Mm-hmm.
2013. But I think seeing gentrification happen so extremely in New York City while studying architecture made me a lot more interested in like the severity of this problem. So I think I spent a few years kind of just doing reading and kind of wrapping my head around the issue and then started organizing in 2019 with a group called Friends of Gadsden Creek in
Mm.
Charleston, which I still organize with.
Okay. Um, so wait, you said South Carolina in Gadsden? Okay. And so, but is that where you are right now?
No, right now I'm in New York City, but I lived there for 2 years, and since moving away, I have still been very involved with the group.
Okay. No, that's awesome. And that's great that you're able to, kind of still be so involved, even though, yeah, you aren't, like, sort of living there. I guess at this point, I feel like I sort of do just want to kind of get right into it. We're gonna switch scenes over here. So now there's on screen we have the piece. It was submitted to Do Not Research. Um, which is, you know, a fun little internet zine kind of thing. And basically the work consists of these nine, you know, profiles, these sort of nine images. And so you wrote the words, right? That's my understanding.
Yeah, like the idea of the project was mine and has been kind of bubbling since last fall after kind of encountering, a lot of these characters and also, embodying a lot of these characters over the past few years. So
Mm.
I yeah, wrote up these nine characters. It was originally actually like an essay format, but I thought it'd be more interesting to do it as a meme project, and then kind of had descriptions of the nine characters and worked with my friend Cecilia, shout out, I Eat Drywall in
Mm-hmm.
Charleston, South Carolina, to do the illustrations, and we kind of went
Mm.
back and forth and iterated them.
Mm. Okay. So I guess here's my kind of like my big my big question is what were you trying to do with the sort of like the imagery and the presentation and kind of presenting it as memes, like what, and even going so far as to like the creation of some of the characters, like what were you going for?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, the main thing would be just to spark some kind of interest and capture some attention to what I think people, I don't know, have, blockages to understanding how to kind of like get into this work because
Hmm.
it's feels so, at least it did for me, because it feels like such a gargantuan kind of beast. Like, how can any one of us, address the housing crisis? And
Right.
rather than being something that was like super didactic or prescriptive, I was kind of interested in this more choose your own adventure. So rather than declaring any kind of single politics or kind of avoiding purity politics, like
Mm.
showing these different approaches, each of which could be kind of an entry point for different personality types. So I think that's why I went with the nine profiles, and it really happened organically in conversation with several discussion groups that I'm in. One it's this group called Manifesting Mutuals with my friends Kai and Lucy. And another is my friend Jessa Schwader Carta, who I've been kind of in conversation with for the past few years around land-based projects and kind of cooperative futures.
Mm.
So yeah, thought the meme format and do not research would be an interesting publishing format rather than the traditional kind of formats I publish on, which happen to be architectural journals or magazines or, you know, books, and wanted to kind of get outside the architecture world and more into maybe like leftist memers or whatever, even conservative memers.
So yeah, so I guess so that's so the goal was more to, it was more how you say, as we like to say in leftist spaces, it was more agitative in nature, right? It wasn't necessarily about um it was more sort of about like kind of provoking kind of something in people than it was about, yeah, no, necessarily telling people what it was they should do, or kind of like, I don't know, I guess on that note, do you think that you've succeeded in that endeavor?
I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of like a couple of different like angles to it, right? Because I have actually a pretty nuanced perspective on this, and I think the work actually does embody a lot of like very kind of positive qualities, but I won't lie, there were parts of it that made me cringe. Like there were bits of it that I was like, "Oh," and other people that I showed it to in sort of the Portland leftist community, because that's where I'm from, right? So everybody in it's kind of like everybody in this city is kind of like what it is, it's this hippie character that you drew. Everybody in Portland is kind of like that. So it's kind of like that, or they're or they're the rabble
Yeah,
rouser.
that's what I was gonna say.
So it's either the hippie or the rabble rouser. Not really a lot of ethical landlords over here.
No.
Not really a lot of co-owners or anything like that. Well, there might be some co-owners, but I don't really know. But I get at the same.
Co-owners are in the Bay Area. Shout out. Yeah, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative.
Oh, nice. I guess the big thing that kind of struck me about it is that on the one hand, I think because I guess that's a thing, especially in the case of like engaging with political stuff. Like I try whenever, especially whenever I do feel like kind of the cringe reaction, I try to unpack it a little bit because I think there's something kind of tense about. I think because that's kind of what political imagination is, right? You're testing new ground. You're trying to create sort of new possibilities. And what I kind of like about the piece, sort of the way that you've done it, right, is the fact that, yeah, you've sort of created a real kind of, I don't want to say, well, but yeah, you've sort of kind of created a real blueprint for, you know, class solidarity, quote unquote, in the sense that there is someone in every social class, more or less, right? Or not so much social class, but every like economic class, I want to say, that's kind of
Mm.
depicted here. And you've got landlords, you've got just kind of homeowners and sort of HOA people. You've got people who seem to not have housing or certainly be moving around from place to place a lot. And I think especially around like the ethical landlord conversation, um yeah, I think there are ways that people who find themselves in the position of being a landlord um can act that are more helpful to the cause, right? Nobody has an excuse not to be a leftist. I guess that's really what I like about it. Is I feel like the piece kind of demonstrates that in a very clear way. Um at the same time, I do think and I guess that's the thing for me. My opinion of really like what it is and of what this is and whether or not the conversation is meaningful kind of really does depend on sort of what you thought was going to kind of happen going into this. Like, did you know that did you know that like there would be such a large contingent of, maybe not a large contingent, right? Because it's all internet stuff. It's not really that big of a deal, but it is like there's some comments in here. Like there's some
The
people.
comments are
The
amazing. I'm
comments
super
are the
pleased with the
comments are the
engagement.
comments are pretty. um there's a couple of ones. There's this one guy that keeps like going around. There's this one guy, this Philps dude, who's like going around
It was
and,
like The
yeah,
Economist.
the
Like,
debate bro economist who's going around and like doing a bunch of shit. And so I think that was sort of like very interesting. There was also like a couple of people going like, "Oh, is this a bit? Like, is this like a joke?" Like a lot of people thought it was like sarcastic and kind of
mm,
not a sincere thing. So,
mm.
how does that make you feel?
Yeah, no, I think it's, well, first I had no expectations, and I think in general I'm really pleased with the engagement, and I think Josh from Do Not Research is as well. I think it has like about 10 times, the amount of
Mhm.
engagement as the other posts on that platform currently, and much more than things from my personal account. So
Right.
I feel like it reached a nerve or somehow got on the explore pages of these like, politicized teenagers or something. I listened to like Joshua Cittarella's, podcasts and interviews with, very political teenagers that are super online. So I imagine we tapped some of that audience.
Yes.
Um, and like in terms of the valence of left versus right, I think it's interesting to see that spectrum on display here when people
Mm-hmm.
aren't sure how to process something if it's not immediately legible. And I think that is what I was really interested in, and the irony pilled or kind of like, slacktivist networks online, or people who are really used to these 10 slide infographics where things are kind of spoon fed to you in a really didactic way. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you kind of differentiate between what an image and text is saying versus what it's actually doing? And I
Right.
think keeping that somewhat, I think, honestly, I don't know. The caption, I think, is pretty straightforward, but maybe people didn't read the caption and just looked at the images. So maybe the images themselves are kind of opaque because they don't immediately kind of like, I don't know, attach themselves to any one single way of doing things correctly. Although I think I've loaded in some of that valence to some of the characters that maybe are
Mm-hmm.
closer to my heart than others. But I think it's a lot less about my authorial voice and more about these characters who really do exist. I've met probably like a dozen of each of these individuals and blends of all of them. So maybe that like difficulty in parsing out the irony and sincerity is the most useful part of it. If
Mm.
even like an Instagram comment section can be politically useful, but like
Right.
I heard from Do Not Research that it was shared a lot the day of on stories. I hope a lot of people sent it to each other, whether as a joke or not. And I don't know how the aesthetics kind of serve this purpose or not. Like I think I see people like commenting on like how ugly it is, and I think
Mm.
like ugliness is similar to cringe or disgust or abjection in that it's like a kind of visceral response to something.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think about the
I
aesthetics?
think the art I think is more or less fine. I was much more interested in the text, to be perfectly honest. The art I think is very classic, like, kind of, or classic might be the wrong word, but the art is like the actual aesthetics of the art. I don't think really like command a lot of attention. I think the words, um, I think the words and the text and sort of the idea of like, yeah, the kind of choose your fighter mix and match sort of thing. I think that's mostly what is interesting to me. What I will say is, yeah, I don't I because I also thought it was a bit until I read the blurb. I read the blurb and then I realized that like the blurb just didn't really read like, parody to me. The
Hmm.
um the blurb was just sort of like a pretty sincere, um and a pretty, kind of succinct explanation of like what it is that is motivating the housing crisis. And I liked the way that it tied it back to 2008. And there was just like kind of a lot of, it didn't read like somebody who was trying to make any kind of point other than, oh, let's, do something about this, which I guess in a lot of ways is kind of like a big part of activism, right? To sort of like encourage people to act. Um, I do think, because, yeah, no, and this, as I started like kind of, as I sort of kept going back to it and reading it more, and as I kept reading the blurb, this line, like, it's like born too late to own property, born just in time to be a real estate activist. Choose your fighter, mix and match. And so the question I wanted to ask you off of that is like, are you familiar with the concept of like LARPing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that there's like a way in which people might have, because I think there is something about, I think that's where a lot of like the kind of like, at least criticism on the left, right? I feel like that's where a lot of like the tension maybe kind of came from, because I think people just sort of like saw these characters and none of them like felt real, or it wasn't real enough for people to like be like, "Oh yeah, I'm this one," or "Oh yeah, this is me." Um and so I don't know, maybe there's something that kind of like happened there. And I'm curious to hear sort of your kind of like to hear sort of how the inspiration behind the characters, because I think like because you said that you've met every single one of these characters and you've met many blends of them. Like how like did you really like is that like what tell me more about that.
In terms of how I met these
Well,
people.
just like the yeah, no, how you met them, where you met them, the story of kind of how all these personalities came together and all these characters came together.
Sure, yeah. Like, I don't know, I've met them all over the place in upstate New York and Hawaii and Seattle and New York City. And whether it's through my own organizing or it's just friends dealing with housing precarity or
Mm-hmm.
people in online spaces. So yeah, there's really nothing here that's really fabricated out of nothing. Um, like in upstate New York, for example, I was just up in the Mohawk Valley, which is west of Albany, and my friend, uh, who I won't name here, is kind of like the hippie, but also the squatter, and is like
Mm-hmm.
setting up a tiny house illegally on this plot of land that he purchased. And, he's a queer, black man, and is doing this pretty much off the grid, operation that's, in my opinion, like really valuable in terms of navigating existing building codes and creating housing for himself in a way that, a lot of us are unable to do. So I think it's just like having conversations with people. And then I think for me, models or profiles are always really useful because
Right.
I'm always thinking about like, how can we make this kind of like perfect cocktail that's, suited to one's personality. So I guess in that way, I'm more of like a pragmatist or something rather than being like, this is like the only way.
Mm.
Um, and I think if we were talking from like if I was in a I don't know, leftist space talking about this, I'm sure probably lots of people would point to the tenant organizer and the socialist as like the two probably fastest ways to get to addressing the housing crisis.
Right.
But like I think in the past few years, something that I've realized is that you can't just prescribe one way for everyone. Like people need to get into this work in different ways. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
much like the ethical landlord could very much transform into the co-owner like 5 years later in life, or
Right.
into the tenant organizer 10 years later in life. And um, kind of getting the appetite for transformative social change like means meeting people where they're at. And
Mm-hmm.
I've felt like a lot of leftist spaces sometimes kind of alienate
No,
people
it's very true.
by
Very
yeah
true.
being elitist and doing the exact thing they're not trying to do. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. The leftist spaces have this tendency to be it's like it's just like it's ironic that for a politic based so heavily on the idea of solidarity and community, so many leftists have no idea how to make friends and even how to be nice to each other and how to talk to each other in a way that like really kind of does sort of what you were talking about, which is that it sort of really galvanizes people and makes them believe that like these horizons, these revolutionary horizons are in fact possible. It looks like we're well, we have seven. It says we have 7 minutes left on our Zoom meeting. I don't know if that means that we can just like restart it again, but I guess the corporations really are trying to. Okay, it looks like the meetings are only allowed to last 40 minutes. Okay, but
That's
we'll
not
see what happens when we get to that. Um, I guess like I do. Yeah, I totally agree. Leftist spaces can be very alienating. Um, the question, I guess, is like when people are trying to do you I guess here's really the question, right, can an unethical landlord turn into an ethical landlord, right? And I feel like that's the question that people maybe thought you were trying to I feel like maybe people thought that that's what you were trying to posit, when in reality I think you're not really trying to say that necessarily. What you're trying to say is like, oh, these are situations you can find yourself in.
Yeah, exactly. I think like I'm not really like positing myself as like a scholar or anything. I feel like I'm stirring the pot, and I'm trying to find like a productive way, I guess, to stir the pot. But in terms of the ethical landlord, I knew that would probably like raise eyebrows,
Right.
because most Marxists or whatever would say, private property itself is, this root of kind of alienation,
Right.
and that housing justice and private property, can't coexist. Um, and I think part of the comment section is also kind of like pointing to the suspicion of this like kind of like liberal, like self, back patting kind of thing where
Mm-hmm.
progressives are trying to get off the hook by, being ethical or, whatever, avoiding their privilege by being queer or,
Mm.
these things you see in the comments.
Yeah.
Um, do I think an unethical landlord can become an ethical landlord? Like, absolutely. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
shitty landlords out there, and I feel like now networks beginning that are holding landlords accountable with like shitty landlord lists and these other kind of like databases. So I
Mm.
think if a landlord can stop exploiting tenants and use the rental in and they don't need the rental income for their own like subsistence, like
Right.
there are totally ways to redistribute and reinvest that wealth into shared equity or alternative schemes that are so lacking, I think, in this country. Like you have all this rental income and a lot of it's just being eaten up as profit when I feel like there's so many more interesting possibilities. And I think our generation, I don't know how old you are, but like, millennials,
I'm
whatever, like
I'm a
there's
millennial. I'm like
yeah,
29ish.
yeah, I'm around the same age. So there's this inheritance of wealth that is happening and is going to keep happening where people are inheriting all this property from their parents or
Mm.
whatever that like want to do something different with it. So I think to just say, oh, all landowners are bad, like fuck you, like that seems really unproductive for the greater goal.
No, it's true, and that is something that I do agree with you with, in the sense that, yeah, kind of like sort of like deriding people or chastising people for circumstances that they find themselves in doesn't really do anything for like community building, or like building kind of like, yeah, these political networks that can act in ways that, actually redistribute wealth, or actually like fight, housing insecurity. And I do think that there's a lot of, I think there is sort of a lot of like, there's a lot of like twitching, or leftists can get very triggered, dare I say, by sort of like mentioning that there are like other political horizons that exist other than just like this one, where like you kind of like don't shower and are like really crusty all the time, and you don't want to like, you're just kind of like don't really like do anything. Because I think that there's a lot of, especially in Portland, I think there are a lot of people who, yeah, in a very real way, use their politics as their identity. And that isn't the same thing as praxis, right? But there's a
Hmm.
different, and surely there is a line that can be walked where you are able to incorporate your identity into your politics. But the idea that you use your identity as a leftist to, shield yourself from criticism, to kind of justify all your behavior, at that point, it doesn't matter what you call yourself or what you quote unquote actually believe. If you're not doing the work of learning more and challenging yourself and trying to be involved in the community, you're not a leftist.
Yeah. And hopefully like I don't know, that's like I think that's kind of why when you say praxis, like I think almost all nine of these profiles, I think kind of unwittingly I wrote in this like kind of mode of transformation themselves. Like I feel like all nine of these characters are in the process of doing something. Like the
Right.
hippie is bringing up an issue at the community meeting.
Right.
The squatters teaching their people that they share space with how to build furniture. The tenant organizers responding to a neglectful like land ownership company or property management company by organizing their tenants. The co-owners is getting people together to fundraise for the next duplex. They're all like in the process of something. So you know moving from inaction to action like is inspiring to me, and hopefully these characters can, whatever the gay adventures as someone called them, maybe stimulate some thought about like what you might do differently. Yeah.
Yeah, no, um so yeah, just as a technical warning, Zoom is telling me we have less than 1 minute left on our little meeting thing. So I guess we'll kind of see if we can get back after that, after this. I assume we'll be able
Yeah.
to.
All right, I'll try the same link.
Yeah, try the same link. But yeah, no, I feel like the comment, there's this comment, the lengths people will go to justify living in New York City that I thought was
I mean, I had to leave New York because I couldn't afford it
no,
anymore.
yeah. Um, that's what, and then it's like asking every landlord I know to raise the rent by $1 gajillion after this. Okay, here we go. All right. All right, all right, all right. Let's see. New meeting. I'm just gonna make a new meeting, I think. The corporations are actively. Yeah, let's. I'm just gonna make a new meeting, I think. Copy invite link.
Oh, because that's what's happening behind the scenes, right? They say that like your session is only allowed to last 40 minutes, but really they just say that so that as a shield, so that way that you don't know that like there's actually secret bigotry going on.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for this whole thing to happen, I just I wanted to introduce um I wanted to introduce oh, excellent, 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 excellent. But yeah, I wanted to introduce um uh this character that we have standing behind me. This is Smegmo. Smegmo is stand-in for the entire Portland leftist community. Um, and I don't know if you can see them, but they're very crusty. And so I wanted to ask Smegmo to introduce themselves really quickly. Um, Hi, Smegmo. Will you introduce yourself? Hi, I'm Smegma and I'm a Maoist third worldist. Smegma, what is that? What does that mean? What's a Maoist third worldist? What does that mean? It means I want to kill all the landlords. Yeah, okay, so it looks like Smegmo might be a little bit too TOS for Twitch. We might have to cut Smegmo off, but I wanted to ask I wanted to have a little bit of a debate maybe between you and Smegmo. Um because I think that there's maybe some productive conversations that can be had. Um
Yeah, I'm
let's
down.
let's let's see. Um I don't know. Smegmo, do you have any questions for Seb? Ethical landlord? It'd be more ethical to kill the landlord. What do you think about that?
More ethical to kill the landlord. That's a great provocation, Smegmo. Thank you for that. Yeah, do you identify with any of the nine profiles, Smegmo?
No, because I'm a real leftist and not a picture on the internet.
Hell yeah. We love to hear it. How are you putting that theory into action, Smegmo?
I'm becoming an alcoholic and not talking to anybody. I'm sorry, I'm projecting.
I hope you're fermenting that alcohol in a ethical way.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I can't promote violence, but super awesome to meet you, and I love your kind of jellyfish chime thing you have going on. You're rocking it.
But if the state uses violence against us, then how are we supposed to defend ourselves?
Oh, I'm all for self-defense.
But what if I want to kill people?
I don't know. I don't know if like charging you high rent is a kind of equal response to assassination.
Okay, I'm gonna go smoke now. Bye.
God. Love Smegmo's voice.
Be safe.
Love Smegmo.
Okay, all right, Smegmo, go take a shower, okay? Whew. Whew. Oh my goodness, what a crazy interaction that was. My goodness, wow.
I would be so bad in like a real live debate with like someone like that.
No, because I think that's kind of like the big tragedy of like I think a lot of like leftists like especially when like leftists like critique each other. I think there is a lot of just kind of like, oh no, you're stupid kind of like yeah, there's a lot of purity testing. Which I think is which I think is kind of bad.
Yeah. It's really just like the proof is in the pudding. Like I feel like for me, I would just default to just being like, "Oh, how are you putting that into practice?" And if they're not, like I feel like they've lost the debate right there.
Yeah, because especially if you do believe that, like, we should be killing all the landlords, it's like, okay, well, how many landlords have you killed? You know, like, how many, like, and then they'll say, like, oh, but that's because the system is, like, keeping me down. And it's like, yes, no, the system is, like, keeping you down. No one's disputing that. What I'm taking an issue with is the way in the sense that you think that, like, because, okay, you kill the landlord, then what do? You know? Does that,
Right.
do you
No,
learn
but-
to fix the house? Like, what happens then, you know?
Yeah. No, but I think you raised like a really good point actually and I think it's productive. I'm also on like the anti-work subreddit sometimes,
Oh,
which like
yeah.
makes me think about this, but
Yeah.
it's like you really do get that argument of like, oh, I don't have any time to organize because I'm working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to pay back all these loans, and I'm so put down by the system that I can't do anything about it. And it's like a really good point. Like many people don't like it's a good question because you look at these like workers movements across history and you think about now versus then and how much time people have, and whether if someone says, I don't have time to organize because of X, X, and X, like I think that's a valid thing to feel. But historically, I think people have had it worse and still managed to organize because there was no other choice. Like, and I think in many places it's getting to that point where, you strike not because you have the luxury of having a savings account to like lean on, but you strike because you just can't continue to like be treated like that.
No, and I think that that's a very good point, which is that, like, yeah, no, the revolution is not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be necessary, right? The revolution is not comfortable. And, like, obviously, like, it would be hypocritical of, I think, a lot of leftists to be like, oh, yeah, no, you have to make yourself uncomfortable to, like, get things done, right? Because that is sort of this like you said, it's like that's sort of this like misunderstanding of like why certain like political actions such as striking have like actually happen. They don't happen because like everybody's like, okay, we've got all our, ducks in a row, like we're gonna do it. It's like, yeah, no, we have to do something. There's the much more urgency, and it's kind of like you're not even thinking about necessarily whether or not you are safe enough to pull it off. You just have to act. The other thing about oh my god, I forgot what I was gonna say. But there's just like it's just like, yeah, no, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of very there's a lot of very well-intentioned people who, yeah, do feel put down. But that feeling of being put down is not like that's part of the oppression itself, right? That's not necessarily reflective of the reality, which is that there is always more that you can be doing, and more importantly, there's always something that you can be doing. At the very least, to kind of like, stay true to yourself. But who knows, maybe even having like, productive conversations with your coworkers might like lead some people to, approach new ideas and think about things in a different way. And it's pretty silly to think that like, yeah, that there's literally nothing that can be done.
Right. Yeah, and it can be convenient, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to like keep dunking on armchair leftists because it's too easy, and I feel like I want to come from a place of good faith, but like, yeah, it's that paralysis is real, but it's also like can be a cop out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I'm looking through these comments and trying to see if there's any more
Yeah.
kind of like fun ones to get into. This one person that like commented, okay, but where can we start? Like that's the
Right.
only person I replied to, and I DM'd with them for a little bit and like shared some resources and talked about their housing organizing that they're doing, I think in Canada or something.
Mm.
Let's see.
I mean, really, it's
Um,
this Philps guy. I kind of just want to read this comment out loud because I
yeah,
wanna let me go ahead. Let me do some let me zoom in on this real quick so that we can really see like what he had to say. So the description is so horribly rid with economic errors. The US has a Keynesian market system, not a liberal system, not a neoliberal system. And a free market for housing, by definition, drives prices down. Like any other hood that sees free trade and competition. The housing market in the US isn't anywhere near free, so it's simple mental gymnastics to call it a market failure. Prima facie, your premise would get an F in any econ class.
swag. This person's profile photo is also so good.
Yeah, no, it's just them like standing on a rock or something. Oh, in the bathrobe, and they've got
Yeah, shout out Phelps.
yeah. Shout out this.
And then we have some great responses, like stimulated a
Oh
great
yeah,
conversation with some people.
free market drives house prices down. Yeah, man, worked for London. No, there's a lot of really good like comments. No, and I think that that's what is kind of interesting is that despite, criticism of the piece that has come from the left, which I think is the only real criticism that I would accept in this sort of case, especially if I were you. It's interesting to see this dude just kind of like pop up, and there's other comments that also seem to be like coming at it from the right. And so I guess that kind of leads me to ask about like Do Not Research's audience, because I'm not super familiar with their work, but like
Yeah.
I'm done talking. I'm sorry. I ended the sentence with but like so. But I want. Did you know like what the political makeup of the audience was, or?
Yeah, I have a general sense of the do not research audience. And I don't even know if this is like the built-in audience for them necessarily that's in the comment section. I also don't really, I think comment wars are like great and awesome.
Yeah.
But I also don't participate in them very much.
Right.
So I don't totally know like the vibe that yeah, was kind of generated here. I can't like I hear when things are like ratioed or whatever, and there's more comments than there are likes, but I think here there's probably a lot of silence, people that appreciate the piece just judging by the number of likes and
Mm-hmm.
shares, I guess. Do Not Research's audience is they're kind of a, like counter platform or counter institution. Um, Similar audience, I guess, to like Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst's podcast,
Yeah.
Interdependence. A lot of kind of left-leaning arts and culture people, but I think Do Not Research is tapping more specifically into, these people that are interested in internet culture and memes and things that aren't really being covered by, the contemporary art world or art criticism. And if so, it's maybe limited to like post-internet art or something. And
Okay.
so I think it's really an amazing platform. The posts are pretty high quality and they pay their contributors and they have a really kind of multimedia, range of things that are shared. A lot of them are images and video. Some of them are kind of
Yeah.
experimental, like almost like ARG type text games. And yeah, pretty
Yeah.
cool.
No, okay. So, but that's, and yeah, no, I would also wonder if like this is the normal audience. I would imagine, especially a kind of like, yeah, sort of like internet zine kind of thing with a podcast to be, especially one that kind of like is willing to go about, um, is willing to kind of go about like presenting something like this. I would expect the audience to be sort of primarily left. Um, and I guess that's the thing is like as far as messaging goes, it doesn't really necessarily feel like you were even trying to like, necessarily like communicate with sort of other leftists. This feels like you're trying to cast a much sort of broader net in terms of you're just kind of
Sure.
trying to like make these like, oh yeah, no, these kind of like cutesy images. Everything's very like kind of positive, very fun, and
Yeah.
so I wonder.
Yeah, ideally playing on like the, I don't know, like narcissism of people projecting themselves onto these and be like, that's me, or like I'm these two, or like, oh, that's totally like my friend. I'm gonna send this to them
Right.
and trying to spark that. And I don't even think it's necessarily like, yeah, like you say, left or right. Like housing, I feel like is just a human right. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something the left and the right can agree on. And I think even now, like I will be listening to people that are more reactionary or more conservative that are still complaining about how expensive it is to purchase a home and how it's totally not
Yeah.
accessible to our generation. So high housing prices like aren't that's not a problem that only the left is dealing with. There are plenty of, whatever your most conservative finance bro or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that would love to buy a single family home for his trad family that's just not able to and might
Right.
want to instead buy a house with his bros. And the co-owner model could totally work for that person regardless of their political stance. So
Right.
I'm interested in something that can be like agile and not necessarily so stuck on one lane.
Yeah. No, I think there definitely is like I think yeah, the agileness is good and it's definitely good to like yeah, no, meet people where they're at. Um I guess sort of the bigger question then for me is well, oh yeah, there's one question in particular. Is that have you really met somebody who is the YIMBY, the yes in my backyard? Have you met somebody that Have you met a moderator on Numtots is really my question.
Unfortunately, I haven't met a moderator from NumTots. That would be a lifelong dream come true. Been following that, yeah, Facebook group for ages though. Um, I don't know. I guess like maybe my partner would identify as the MB. She said she's like really sympathetic to this character. And I actually saw this character like I kind of I guess became more um aware of them after doing some research on like institutional investors, basically these private companies that are buying up like massive amounts of like single family homes across the country. And I read all these articles kind of about in general like the housing stock and all these, NIMBYs causing all these issues. So I haven't met this person IRL, but I've definitely like watched them in city council meetings and in city like comment sections and articles written by EMBs and all this.
Okay, because I think maybe there's kind of like, this is sort of the tension between like this kind of, oh yeah, no, meeting people where they're at versus like, oh, we have to take it all down. Right, sort of the more I would say, I would almost phrase it as like, yeah, a pacifist versus a violence approach, kind of. A pacifist versus sort of a militarist approach, which is that like, yeah, the sort of like, I guess maybe the sort of assumption on the part of like a lot of leftists, left-leaning people, or really just people who have kind of been displaced from housing in general, but I would also argue people that sort of interpret that experience through the lens of like, leftism and like, oh, I was disenfranchised by like this specific aspect of the system and da 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 da. I guess the thing that they would sort of argue is that because of the power imbalance that like, owning a home kind of gives you over other people, that there's no real incentive for a character like the Yimby to exist, that there's no reason why people who have the power to own houses would want to, be involved in, would want to advocate for more 5/1 multifamily housing, for instance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I feel like I saw a lot of memes that are like, people hate on those 5/1s so much that just because they're so ugly and the materials and color palettes are so like incongruent with the existing neighborhood's character or whatever. But then a lot of people kind of rightfully so correct these people and say this is actually a workforce housing. This is actually affordable housing. And like just because it's new construction doesn't mean it's luxury housing. And there are a lot of like 5/1s that are, really efficient. And while they're not beautiful, they're like serving a need. Like look at, socialist housing. Look at like social housing movements in America. Like, yeah, having these massive blocks, like while like tearing down buildings can be heart-wrenching, but like when there's such an influx of people that like need housing yesterday, like if it's not
no, it
totally
totally, I 100% agree. And with that, my point is that I feel like, do you think that it's possible for people to, I guess really in terms of like how would you, there's sort of this tension that like, oh yeah, people who own homes or whatever, they want the property values to go up, so they're not going to do anything that's going to bring them down, right? When I think in reality, the fact of the matter is that the current housing market as it stands, the current trends in the housing market and this dynamic of people continuing to be displaced, as more and more wealth like transfers, to the 1% and all that stuff, that there's no incentive for these people to, care about that, when in reality I think the opposite is quite true. What most homeowners don't realize is that, or maybe some of them do, maybe they don't, is that eventually, like, they are going to be displaced by the very same factors that are, currently displacing so many people. Once, because as the middle class keeps shrinking and as more and more people become sort of in the, underclass, as more and more people become working class, because, the money just kind of evaporates, that, like, yeah, nobody is really safe. So if you are trying to preserve your, cute little neighborhood, you kind of do need to address, like, the housing crisis in a sustainable way, because if things continue as they are, this cute little neighborhood will be destroyed.
Yeah, it's coming for all of us, just some faster than others.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of takes me to this thing about, like, people in the left being, about how leftism being kind of a response to, like, resentment, or, like, an interpretation of resentment, and, like, class envy, and, like, sort of, like, you know going like, oh yeah, I was, and also this kind of like, oh yeah, no, I, as, like, a disadvantaged person, I was, like, wronged by these people, and the revolution is, like, a way for me to get sort of, like, revenge.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I think a lot of those feelings are valid, but I don't think that that's, you know what I mean? I don't think that's right thought. You know what I mean? I don't think
Mm.
that's right speech. And I don't think necessarily, like, yeah, acting on violence is, right action in
Yeah.
in the case, especially of addressing something as complicated as, you know, the housing crisis and the dynamics that underpin
Mhm.
it. Um,
No, that's a really, yeah, incisive analysis. And yeah, I understand the skepticism because a lot of times these 5/1 multifamily things are luxury. So like why would anyone think that it's not, like, and I think there's also something about like being homeowner pilled where it slowly like poisons your mind, where like maybe you
right.
were working class or middle class, but then you see your housing value like double or triple in a few years and you're like, whoa, now I have money. Like anything that could threaten that, like I'm gonna
Right.
very, have an emotional reaction to. And I think that's fair. Like, and I think there needs to be a nuanced race and class analysis, like especially if we're talking about like Black home ownership, which was
Yeah, yeah,
denied
yeah.
in this country for so long. The accumulation of Black wealth, I think, is such a different conversation if than the accumulation of white wealth or accumulation of, new money versus old money.
Right.
It's not a kind of blanket statement for all of them. But I think that homeowner having that emotional response to seeing, a densification in their urban neighborhood, like it's such a like rich moment where it's like they have so much power in their homeowners association or in their local like urban planning council, but then you also have this like really like urgent need for just more units. So yeah, I've no idea what the answer is to how you kind of like have that power turned around. Like a lot of places in Europe you have, expropriation, like, which is
Right.
in America such a, I don't think it's like a alien concept to us now. Like it was some, and I think the histories here of urban renewal in like, the 40s and, FDR times of, forcibly taking property from people isn't something that like we can easily imagine now. Like it's really hard for me to imagine like, the city of Portland, like forcibly taking property
Oh,
from single family
they're
homeowners.
not gonna do that. Yeah.
Yeah, to turn into like a massive apartment blocks. But in some cases, maybe that's what's needed. Like, I don't know. I'm just saying. Like,
No, I definitely think, yeah, no, it's definitely like, oh, and we have a comment. I understand the need for 5/1s. I'm also aware of how urbanization will affect rural communities and further gentrification, gatekeeping of rural and suburban areas, penning marginalized and displaced people in cities because it's the only place they can afford to live. Just a thought. I don't really know where I stand on this. And oh yeah, Portland will not give up on its urban dev projects. I yeah, no, I think that that's the other thing too, is like the kind of like, because as we modernize, right? So hopefully, as we start to realize, oh, in America specifically, that, oh yeah, we do need to kind of like congregate people in more like urban settings, and there's all these like land, there's all this like unused land that goes around. There's definitely going to be like the tension there between communities that are used to living in a specific way now having to adapt to sort of a new like kind of thing. I don't know. Seb, what is your like sort of perspective on kind of like managing that tension?
Yeah. I'm not a urban planner by any means, but I've been thinking about these questions of land and property and urban growth for a little while, so I could comment from what I know. I know that what I'm currently inspired by are, books like Radical Suburbs or this book Countryside, the Future. And this kind of like myth, like we heard for so long, like 80% of the world's population will live in cities by 2030 or something, and
Right.
we're totally off track there. Like that's not happening
Oh
at the
yeah, yeah,
rate
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
projected. The suburbs and rural existence is very much still happening. So as we densify cities, and the kind of like reverse of like white flight happens, where now the gentrification of cities with wealthy white people going back into city centers and then
Mm-hmm.
displacing people of color to the suburbs and the
Right.
exurbs. The medicine in the comments is I think really tapping into the differences between like urban, suburban, and rural,
Yeah.
um, and the access between these things. Like a lot of this is relevant also to public transportation in terms of access
Yes.
to getting to your place of work in a meaningful way, and not continuing this sprawl, which is horrible for resource usage.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's a really hard question to answer, but in terms of, I think we have to think at all three of those scales when we're thinking about housing and not just the urban. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And I also wonder if like, yeah, no, because there is, because of a big like this idea that like, oh, in order to get housing for everybody in the city, we will have to disturb you know these like more rural communities, or we will have to displace certain people. um I think that's kind of a false choice in a lot of senses. I don't think that the densification of urban cities necessarily requires disrupting more like rural ways of living. I think there's plenty of land usage issues within the cities themselves that can be addressed to kind of like, you know, deal with that, especially dealing with like the housing supply. um yeah, I mean, as far as like suburbs go, it's just the unfortunate thing about suburbs is that, yeah, no, they're also car dependent. Like if you're in a suburb, you have to drive somewhere, and instead of like building kind of all the things you need around the suburb so that you don't have to drive, so much of the suburb is predicated on like, oh yeah, I'm going to live 30 minutes out and then drive into the city and then drive back. So it's just such like a funny it's such a funny model, and it's interesting to think like what's going to like what switch is going to have to flip to kind of get people to value the suburbs less, I guess, is the way that I want to phrase what I'm saying.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah.
And a lot of these suburbs are like densifying and becoming, cities in their own right. And especially
Mm-hmm.
now with kind of work from home and people, you know,
Yeah.
not having to commute as much as they did, like that's also transforming our urban landscapes and like patterns of social use. Like you see these malls and these office buildings being converted into housing in urban
Yeah.
centers, like addressing these vacancies. It's like architecture and housing are so slow, like compared to I feel like how our social behavior switches, that it's
Mm-hmm.
always like lagging in this strange way.
Right.
Um, but public transportation, I think, is a key ingredient in the conversation.
Yeah, no, and it's you because you're talking about that lagging there, and I think as far as like planning political projects go, like there kind of is a need to be very cognizant of the ways in which like policy decisions in particular, but I think most things in life just don't really happen like instantly. And while and that's the thing, people's minds can maybe change faster than their material conditions do. And so, but then because of the fact that people will with their changed minds run up against their same material conditions, that will reinforce either the reverting back to the status quo or will have some kind of other effect. Is there's this whole kind of like there's a lot of like different intermingling pieces, and it's funny because that was Marx's whole point, right? The dialectic, this idea that like revolution is a conversation almost between all of these different factors, and it's a very slow change. And yet so many people who identify as Marxists don't seem cognizant of that at all in this way that is like shockingly ironic. Um, so yeah, I guess I don't know. Do you have anything else to add? Do you have anything that you want to promote? I feel like we've had a very substantial conversation. Thank you for joining me once again. Plug anything you want to plug.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for hosting. I guess one plug. Yeah, well, one thing I'll add to what you were just saying is a lot of these being kind of slower moving policy decisions. And I think whether you I think part of the nine profiles was to kind of appeal to people who believe in electoral politics and believe in legislative change, but also to appeal to people that are interested into taking things into our own hands and working
Right.
insurgently. So whether it's like, and I think we've all, seen spaces like this, whether it's like a punk house or it's some like kind of off the grid commune or, heard about these things.
Right.
But I guess in terms of things to plug, it's not on the do not research post, but on my profile on at Seb Choe on the last post, the Yimby. If you scroll to the second slide, it includes a list of about 10 publications and 10 organizations that kind of allows people to dive deeper into this stuff. So that's kind of the only plug I guess I have where, if people want to learn more about the nine profiles, those are some places to start.
Excellent. And then I guess my one last question. Are you still doing is there any more music stuff on the horizon? There was the show that there was the Numinal Loom like 10-year anniversary show. Is there anything else on the horizon
Yeah.
from you?
Yeah, that Numinal Loom show is amazing. Oh, I guess one other thing to quickly plug before the music, Friends of Gadsden Creek,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
Instagram. That's the environmental justice campaign in South Carolina that's fighting against displacement of a historical Black community called Gadsden Green from this development called West Edge. So yeah, at Friends of Gadsden Creek, if anyone's interested in learning about that campaign. In terms of music, I'm playing a show as Broken Spear this Saturday with an artist called Glass Eater for their release, and it's in Ridgewood at a place called the Deep End. So that's this Sunday. So any New York people come on through, and yeah, working on like a 5-track-ish, yeah, kind of like vocal pop EP that I'm putting some bells and whistles on for. So keep an eye out for that.
Nice. Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Um, Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I hope that this conversation has been interesting for people. It was definitely very interesting for me. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think about whether or not this interview will be able to be edited down into like a little meme clip thing, because that's what I like to do with all of them. Um, I don't know. I feel like there are definitely some memeable moments. I think we can do something with this. But yeah, no, I hope that the conversation's been stimulating. I hope that it doesn't feel like we just sat around, chatting for chatting about nothing for a long time. But yeah. On that note, Local Cinema is tuning out. Bye.